Hello again, my little conscripts, and welcome to another Mordian Glory video. In today's episode, we shall be casting our ever-critical eye over another Imperial Guard 10th edition Codex datasheet. And this time we are going to be returning to everyone's favourite galactic gravel pit by taking a look at the Cadian Heavy Weapon Squad. I quite like this datasheet, although it does have some pretty stiff competition in the new codex. So let's not mess around, let's see how it stacks up against some of the other units, and so without further ado, let's get right into this thing. As is tradition, let us begin with a cheeky gander at the stat line of this unit. Movement of 6 inches is pretty good. That puts it on the same level as a lot of other guard infantry units, although it is important to note that in comparison to something like the Krieg Heavy Weapon Team, this is actually a little bit faster because the Krieg Heavy Weapon Team only moves at about 4 inches. And then you've also got some of the other static weapon teams like the Field Ordnance Battery, which I think only moves like 3 or 4 inches as well. So 6 inches is standard for guard infantry, but it is actually pretty good when looking at some of these infantry-based static fire support options. Toughness 3 with a 5+ save and 2 wounds is very fragile. That is basically just a couple of guardsmen. And after playing a few games of 10th edition with the new codex, I can tell you that guardsmen and guardsman-like profiles die in droves. The durability of this unit comes from 2 things. One, a lot of the weapons it has are quite long-ranged. So if you can hang back and do some decent long-range DACA, that might be able to protect you. The other way that this unit is protected is often by the fact that it has access to an indirect fire weapon choice. So it doesn't really matter how fragile you are if you are behind some big L-shaped terrain and the enemy can't get to you. However way you slice this is not a lot of durability, and if your opponent does manage to get to grips with them, expect them to die like piss at the first opportunity. Next, we've got leadership of 7+. I mentioned this with the Cadian Heavy Weapon Team, and I also touched upon this with the Field Ordnance Battery, but with these smaller fire support units that tend to be made up of 2 to 3 models, the leadership value really isn't that important. It's kind of irrelevant. Think about it. This squad consists of 3 heavy weapon teams. If you lose one of them, then you don't take a battle shock test, and you've still got enough firepower that you might want to order it and you might want to use stratagems on it. But the moment you go down to 1 heavy weapon team, you've lost 2 of the others, the squad's pretty battered. At that point, you almost don't care if you pass or fail leadership, because you've not really got enough objective control for it to, in the most likely scenario, tip an objective. You're not going to be probably a good target for a stratagem, apart from in very desperate circumstances, and your firepower is not going to be great whether you've got an order or not. So leadership here is actually fairly irrelevant. 7+ is completely standard issue in the guard, but I don't worry about leadership when it comes to my heavy weapon squads. Typically, they're either at full strength or they're dead, and if it gets to the point where they're taking battle shock tests, they're probably combat effective anyway. Objective control of 2 is fine. It's 2 guardsmen stuck on a base. These are not battle line guardsmen, so 2 OC. It's only going to be 6 OC in a full squad. Maybe if you've got 2 or 3 of these things stacked on a big objective and like your backfield, that could be a big deal. But 2 OC doesn't really mean a huge amount. It's nice to have, but it's not going to be doing that primary game. These guys are fire support units. Speaking of fire support, let's get to the unit composition, the weapons, and the war gear. Like I said, this squad starts off with 3 heavy weapon teams. You can't increase or decrease that. It always comes with 3. And each model is equipped with a heavy bolter, a las pistol, and heavy weapon team close combat weapons. Little side note here, but this heavy weapon team, and these heavy weapon teams, this heavy weapon squad, doesn't come with any las guns. If you remember at the Cadian heavy weapon team, they actually got a las gun each, which wasn't a big deal. I mean, it's a las gun, but it was a little bit of extra firepower. Am I really going to hold it against the Cadians? Absolutely not. 3 las guns is almost never going to tip a game in your favor. I just thought it was funny and that I would mention it, and it's also an important distinction and a big difference between Cadian and Cadian heavy weapon teams. Let's move on from the thrilling subject of a few free lasguns and instead focus on the heavy bolter, the heavy weapons that you're taking. Now, you can swap that heavy bolter out for an autocannon, a lascannon, a missile launcher, and a mortar. And you can do that on each heavy weapon team. Now, not all the heavy weapon teams need to have the same weapon. If you really wanted one lascannon, one autocannon, and one heavy bolter, you could do. However, and I can't stress this enough, I strongly, many more stronglies recommend you do not mix and match weapons. Standardize, homogenize, specialize. The reason for this is if you take a heavy weapon team that you think can handle anything, because it's got a little bit of anti-infantry, a little bit of anti-tank, the reality is it can't handle anything. It can't. Because you're not going to have enough anti-infantry for when you need to deal with infantry. And you're not going to have enough anti-tank when you need to deal with tanks. You're just going to have a really watered down unit, which is never going to be able to do the job that it needs to do at the key moment. So always go for 3 of the same weapon. Of course, if you're a newer player, you might be thinking, well, what weapons do I go for? Let's take a quick look at the different profiles here and their pros and cons. So the autocannon is the jack of all trades, master of none. I really like autocannons from a fluff point of view. And as a bit of a long beard, I remember the times when autocannons are actually pretty rare. Now it seems like factions tend to have access to them a little bit more. But it used to be one of the sort of signature things, or the flavor town items of the guards, that we got autocannons that a lot of other factions didn't. That was mostly because other factions got like better, more unique weapons. But the guard, for me, the autocannon is always iconic to the guard for me personally. Now, it has a decent volume of fire with 2 shots. It's strength 9, AP -1, damage 3. So the strength is okay because it means that it's going to wound most infantry on 2s. Elite infantry is still going to be wounded on 3s. And it can threaten a lot of vehicles because the worst case scenario it's going to be wounding on 5s. And a lot of the time against light vehicles. And really the autocannon is great for destroying light vehicles. If it has any specialization, it's a light vehicle shredder. And with Eldar being on the rise, that's actually a big deal. The strength 9 can often wound on 3s or 4s. And the moment your autocannon starts winning vehicles on 3s and 4s, you're having a great time. The problem with the autocannon is that we tend to find ourselves in a bit of a very elite infantry meta, and we find ourselves, often we're talking 2-up saves here, or 3-up with the 4-point vulnerable save. And we also find ourselves in a vehicle and monster heavy meta. And so the problem is that AP -1 often really lets it down. Sometimes you can fire a burst of autocannons. Let's say you've got 3 of them in the squad. You've got 3 teams, each with autocannons, so 6 shots in total. Sometimes you can get lucky and you sneak a couple of wounds past and you sneak like 6 damage past the enemy. That can be really nice. But I tend to find that often the autocannon gets kind of screwed over by the benefit of cover. Because its AP -1 essentially becomes AP 0. Because if you shoot an enemy unit that's got a 2+ save and it has the benefit of cover, that enemy unit still has a 2+ save. It's really annoying, but that's how it works. So I find the autocannon is a good all-rounder, but it tends to be my second pick. It's my second pick if I have run out of my first pick. And my first pick is the lascannon. So the lascannon has 1 less shot, but has +3 strength, +2 AP, and does D6 with 1 damage, which on average comes out to 4.5 damage. And often it can spike. It can really spike up. Sure, it might only end up doing 2 damage, but it's on average, it does tear a big chunk out of enemy units. Now, again, because we're in this vehicle and monster and elite infantry heavy meta, I tend to find I need lascannons for pretty much every target I'm encountering. Because when I do encounter infantry, it's some like 3 or 4 wound monstrosity that's got some crazy invulnerable, like a 2+ save and a 4% vulnerable save, and I need like the AP -3 to cut through the cover to kick them down to that 4-up, whether it's 4 armor or 4 invuln. And so I find I just need the big APs. The thing that I'm finding in 10th edition right now, we're about 18, 20 months into it at the time of recording this video, is that the most important stat to me is almost AP. Because I'm just finding there's so many tough enemies out there that trying to grind through like 2+ saves, trying to make your opponent fail ones. It's just a really unreliable strategy. And also, even if you manage to get them down to like a 3, let's say like an AP -2 weapon and you're hitting a 2+ save unit, and then it goes down to like a 3-up save because of the benefit of cover, I find that you just trying to grind through that with volume it's just not reliable enough. So your opponent will just make all their 2-up or 3-up saves at the worst possible time, and it might cost you the turn or start making your turn be very, very inefficient. So I just like going big or going home. I'll admit that's definitely a bit of a personal preference of mine, definitely a bit of a biased note of mine, but I just like going big or going home because for me, I don't like trusting statistics. Because let me tell you, they rarely seem to fall in my favor. The only time I ever seem to make my opponent reliably die is when he's got the lowest possible save. Now, there is one downside to the las cannon. It is only one shot and it is ballistic skill 5+. But it is important to note that, like all of the heavy weapons here, the las cannon, they all start with ballistic skill 5+, but they have heavy. Now, what heavy means is if you stay still, you get +1 to hit. And you can stack heavy with the take aim order in the guard. Now, I say this every single time, and I know that at this point people are just kind of trolling me in the comments, and I love that. I love a good troll, don't get me wrong. But you can stack heavy and take aim. It's one of the biggest mistakes that new players make, because in the core rules it says you can't ever have more than +1 to hit. Now, if you read the core rules sort of deeply and properly, you'll find that when we're talking about to hit, we're talking about the physical dice roll. So you can never have more than a +1 modifier to that physical dice roll. But take aim doesn't give you +1 to your dice roll. Take aim gives you +1 to your ballistic skill characteristic, basically the number that's here. So because take aim is increasing this stat and heavy is increasing a different thing, the two mechanics can stack. So that's really important to note, because it means you can go from a really terrible 5+ to hit to a 3+ to hit fairly easily. Of course, you do have to stay still, which could be a bit risky, but it's relatively easy to achieve. So because of that, even though the las cannon's got low volume of fire, because I can get it up to a 3+ to hit pretty reliably, I really like it, because more often than not, it does actually hit. Now, I said that the las cannon was my number 1 pick, but I do actually have a second number 1 pick, and that is the mortar. Now, you might think that I've gone a little bit bonkers here, because I've just said how we're in a vehicle monster heavy meta, and now we look at the mortar and it's like strength 5, AP 0, damage 1, and it's like D6 shots, so it's super swingy. What the hell is going on with that? The thing with the mortar is you have to look at the special rules. It's got blast, it's got heavy, but most importantly, it's got indirect fire. Now, blast is actually quite important because it makes that D6, that random number of shots, way more reliable. If you start shooting this, even at like a basic squad of like 5 intercessors or something, or 5 sisters of battle, or like 10 fire warriors, or 10 like Eldar guardians, or whatever, it's going to be getting like D6 +1 or D6 plus like 2 shots. And remember, each team has a mortar. So you're going to be fighting 3d6. And if you're fighting a 10-man squad, that's going to be 3d6 plus 6 shots. That suddenly ain't so swingy. There's a lot of numbers being rolled there. There's a lot of potential being rolled there. So the D6 shots is a little bit of a misnomer. It's a little bit misleading. It's actually tends to be more reliable than that when shooting at its ideal target. The big thing though is indirect fire. So this doesn't need line of sight to be able to see its target. So you could have these on your home objective behind a big L-shaped ruin, behind some line of sight blocking terrain, and sure, they might be very, very fragile. But like we said, if the enemy can't physically see you, they can't physically target you, then your durability almost doesn't matter. And you're able to shoot at them, and they're basically unable to shoot at you. The thing with indirect fire, though, is that at best you can hit on a 4. So a 1, 2, or 3 always misses. And you also have a -1 to hit modifier. So you start off on a 5+. You get +1 to hit because of heavy, then you get -1 to hit because of indirect fire, so you're back onto a 5+. So if you want mortars to hit good, to hit on 4s, you do need to have take aim for them as well. So that way you can go back. This goes to a 4+ with basically +1 and -1 staying on a 4+. Now, the reason why I love mortars so much is because of the fact they're indirect fire. Because if you take 2 or even 3 squads of these, not teams, 3 squads. So we're looking at like 9 heavy weapon teams in total. You can actually get a hell of a lot of indirect fire for dirt cheap. At time of recording, Cadian heavy weapon teams are only 50 points a pop. So you can get quite a lot of them, and they're pretty decent at doing indirect fire. However, there's a big caveat that hangs over all of this, which is that if you were to take mortars in a heavy weapon squad, there is a better datasheet for it. This is where we were talking about competition earlier, right? We were talking about competition in the intro of the video. Cadian heavy weapon teams get mortars, but also against certain targets, they get reroll 1s to hit and reroll 1s to wound. When you use mortars with your Cadian heavy weapon teams, you basically don't have an ability. And mortars are actually going to become surprisingly quite relevant in the current meta because of Eldar. So Eldar are definitely a popular competitive army. There's a bit of jury out at the moment whether they're broken or not. Whether they're broken or not, I almost think it's irrelevant, because Eldar just generally are a popular army because they're quite a venerable faction. And when a codex comes out, there's always going to be some surge in popularity with the faction. Eldar vehicles tend to be toughness 9. Now that means that you wound those on 5s, and mortars wounding vehicles on 5s rather than 6s is really, really big. And Cadian mortars getting real 1s to hit, real 1s to wound against vehicles and monsters against Eldar, who are going to be prevalent in the meta, is really big. So the problem with the mortar the mortar is great. The mortar is great. The problem with the mortar in the Cadian heavy weapon team is that there's just a better datasheet for it, and that is the Cadian one. So as a result, I would say that even though generically I like las cannons and mortars my first pick, I think for Cadians, las cannons is the better pick because it pairs well with their ability, which we'll be taking a look at in a moment. There are only 2 weapons that I would actively avoid, and that is the heavy bolter and the missile launcher. Now, I love heavy bolters. I think they're a classic weapon in Warhammer and with the Guard, but it's not got as much range, and it's definitely a anti-infantry profile. It's an anti-light infantry profile, so it's not good against elite infantry. It's not good against vehicles. It's not good against monsters. It's not suitable for the current for 10th edition. Really, it's just not suitable. Missile launchers are frankly the worst weapon in the game. Like, they are just that bad. Essentially, you can fire D6 bolter shots at someone. I mean, come on. Or if you want to try and fire like some sort of anti-tank round, you've got the crack missile. But in both situations, you just if you want an anti-tank team, go for las cannons. Like I said before, so you want to specialize. If you're going to be firing crack rounds every turn, why didn't you just pick a las cannon? And if you're going to be firing the frag blast, you're going to wish that you just had like mortars or autocannons. And the frag blast is generally crap because it's not the right weapon, a bit like with heavy bolter, right? Just not the right profile. Here's the thing. Heavy bolters have been fantastic in previous editions, and so I don't place them at the bottom of the list. I place them at they are not good right now, but I reckon in future editions they could come back around. Missile launchers have always been terrible. Always. And there's always been people that have tried to argue this case of, well, you know, it can handle any situation. Remember what I said earlier? If you're trying to handle every situation, you can't handle any situation. Missile launchers, in my opinion, in the last over a decade of me playing this game competitively, have always been the worst heavy weapon. Not just for the Guard, but for most factions. The only upside they have is that you can quote Black Hawk down and be like, RPG! Every time that you fire them. Other than that, I would leave them at home. Don't worry about the melee weapons. If these guys get into melee, they're so dead. Let's look at their ability. Covering fire. Each time you target this unit with the Fire Overwatch stratagem, while resolving that stratagem, hits are scored on an unmodified hit roll of a 5+, or an unmodified hit roll of a 4+. Instead, this unit is within 6 inches of 1 or more friendly platoon units. So the first thing to understand is that you cannot fire Overwatch with indirect fire weapons. This is why I was saying earlier that the mortar doesn't pair with covering fire. I would love it if you could do covering fire Overwatch with mortars hitting on a 4+. That would make them amazing and might even make them some of the best mortars in the game. But unfortunately, there's been various FAQs, changes to the game, balance patches, all that kind of stuff to do with indirect fire. And one of those was you can't Overwatch on an indirect fire weapon. So then this basically comes down to autocannons and las cannons. I really like having a squad of Cadian heavy weapons with las cannons, which create a dilemma for your opponent. I love weapons in general that create dilemmas, because dilemmas have no good solution. This is the difference between a dilemma and a problem. A problem has a solution. A dilemma has no good option. You just got to try your best through it, all right? If you have a unit of Cadian las cannons, even just one of them with 3 las cannons, they can be out in the open and they can be doing a little bit of fire support. And the moment that your opponent, sort of moves out, maybe tries moving towards to get rid of them, or moves out with a big vehicle, you can be like, Overwatch, bang, I'm going to hit you with 3 las cannons. Now, sure, the average is you hit 1.5 times, and you can't hit half the time, so maybe you're unlucky, you only hit once. But the dilemma for your opponent is, what if I get hit 3 times? I have had people alter their game because of Cadian heavy weapon teams. Because I was able to basically stack up. I just had a Cadian heavy weapon team just covering an objective. And they were like, okay, well, I'm going to move my transport onto that objective. And then I went, okay, well, I'm going to Overwatch you. And they're like, oh, well, that's okay. Because if I die, my infantry will get onto the objective anyway. And I'm like, yes, but when you are blown out of a transport, you are battle shocked. So actually, you wouldn't hold that objective. And if it's an objective like I've stickied, then it remains mine and I keep the primary points. Or if it's where they're trying to score something like extend battle lines to secure no man's land. And you might think, well, that's quite a niche scenario. I think if Overwatch was free and it wasn't a stratagem, and you got to do it once per turn, everyone would do it every turn. That sounds obvious because it's like a freebie. But my point is like, Overwatch is a really good stratagem, and people wish they could use it more often than not. And there's a whole bunch of stratagems that exist, a whole bunch of strategies that exist around the stratagem of Overwatch. So you're probably going to be Overwatching people anyway, but then there's going to be these relatively common scenarios that come up where you can really force your opponent into a bad spot, because you can force them to have a dilemma. Is it an amazing ability? It's not like S tier. Does it cost you a CP? Yes. Are CP precious? Absolutely. Would I spam 3 Cadian heavy weapon teams? Only if I was needing a lot of las cannons. But putting one squad in your list, having a little bit of extra fire support, and then potentially creating a dilemma, it's only 50 points for one of these units. 50 points for a unit, even if you don't get its ability off, is still just very cheap las cannons, is good. Then you've got covering fire, which can be very, very good indeed. Quick side note, there has been a change to how heavy weapon teams work with transports. If you're a veteran guard player, this is important to know. When using the firing deck of something like a Chimera, each heavy weapon team counts as 2 models. So you can no longer have 2 heavy weapon teams shoot out the firing deck to Chimera. You'd only be able to have 1. That definitely reduces the capability or the possibility of having cheap Daka sort of Timu tanks. Still, having a las cannon shoot at the top of a Chimera isn't bad. Now, that covers a lot of stuff that's on the datasheet, but I actually want to talk about a bunch of that's off the datasheet. I want to talk about the bigger picture here for a moment. Firstly, I want to talk about one of the positives of heavy weapon teams that often gets overlooked. They are often a unit which does more damage than people expect, especially when you're running 3 las cannons. They're also often a unit that your opponent wants to prioritize, but kind of can't, because you're going to have bigger, scarier things. I love pairing heavy weapon teams with big tanks, like Rogel Dawns and Lehman Russes, because the obvious target, the high priority, the thing that's going to be slamming your opponent hard every single turn is going to be the big tank. And in the case of it being like a Rogue or Dawn, which can be very much a mid-table bully, it's also going to be that's in their face. It's going to be the obvious. It's going to be distracting them a little bit. And I have found that whilst your opponent is so busy dealing with the big tanks that are coming at them hard, like the linebacker Rogue or Dawns and stuff, the heavy weapon teams are just there, just firing away, firing away, firing away. So generally speaking, I think heavy weapon squads are pretty decent. I think they are often sort of seen as too fragile, but I have been surprised at the indirect ways, whether it's literally indirect fire or via distractions, that you can make these guys a little bit more durable or stick around a bit longer than they should do. So that's one thing to note. But let's talk about a real hot topic, something that I think is going to be prevalent in a lot of people's minds, which is Cadian heavy weapon squads versus the Krieg ones and the Catachan ones. Comparing the Cadians to the Kriegers have a number of advantages, like firing on death, but the big thing is they pay for them. They pay 75 points per team. Cadians pay 50 points. So Cadians are significantly cheaper. That makes them good if you want to be spamming las cannons. And there is absolutely a list for spamming las cannons, taking as many as you can inside like a recon detachment. And it's like, okay, well, I want to maybe get like 18 las cannons in my list. Well, you know what? I'm going to go for 3 Catachan ones and 3 Cadian ones. And that's going to cost me 300 points. Or if you're going for some absolute mad mega giga mortar pit where you're like, I want to have 18 mortars in my army, which you can do if you take 3 Catachan and 3 Cadian weapon squads. So I do think that the Krieg ones, they probably are better, but you have to pay for that. And sometimes there's going to be scenarios where you don't have the points in your list to pay for the premium option. Then we've got the Cadian teams versus the Catachan teams. Brutally honest, the Catachan ones are just better. They come with Scout, they get all of the same weapons, and their ability doesn't require a CP to be spent on it. A precious, precious CP. So I think the Catachan ones are probably the go-to. But it's very easy to say, oh, Catachan's the best, and then everyone just completely forgets about and dismisses the Cadians. I still think the Cadian heavy weapon teams are good. I think they're a solid, decent B-tier choice. But I think the Catachan heavy weapon teams are an A tier, if not an S tier choice. For me, Cadian heavy weapon squads, there's 2 ways that I'm going to include them in my list. Either I'm going to have one squad in there, which is going to create a bit of a dilemma and maybe have some really cheeky Overwatch with some powerful las cannons. Or I'm going to be taking 3 of them and going 9 las cannons because I am part of Recon Detachment Gang. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Are you a fan of the Cadian heavy weapon squads? Do you think I'm overlooking anything about them? Or do you think that the Kriegers and the Catachans have them beat? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to go ahead and smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.